All right, welcome to Kingdom Reflections. I'm your host, Wiley Edwards, and I'm joined today by Representative Danny Garrett, who has represented the 44th District of Alabama since 2014.
That's
Is
right.
that correct?
That's right.
And that includes the areas of Trussville, Clay, and parts of Pinson. And today we're going to look at the intersection of faith and politics and faith and civic responsibility and how faith influences legislation. So as we get going, just kind of give us a little bit. First off, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
And
Wiley is really good friends with my children,
Yeah,
and lived in our
sure.
house in Tuscaloosa for a while.
That's
Got to know
right.
your family, great folks, and
That's
we really
right.
appreciate the friendship.
Oh man, it's a joy. I'm
glad to be here
Yeah,
today.
glad you're on here. Share a little bit about your journey into politics and how you became a public servant.
Yeah. So I always have been interested in politics. Now, the politics I was interested in growing up was not near as polarized as we are today. So it's a different interest, but I was always interested. Never thought I would be in it.
Right.
Back in 2013-ish, the person who'd held the position of state representative for this district was Arthur Payne, and he had served for 36 years.
Okay.
And he had decided he was not going to run again.
Right.
And so when that happens, that opens up, anybody, that's an open seat, and everybody. So early on, though, some people called me and said, if he's not going to run, you ought to think about running. And I thought, why? When I was on the school board at the time, I'd been appointed to the school board and really enjoyed that. That was my first kind of foray into public service.
Right.
But really never thought much about it till then. And so a few other people reached out, so I prayed about it. I thought, it's something I'd like to do. But I was working for a company, and I was working for a family-owned business. And they, at some point, wanted to sell their company, but they didn't know when that'd be. But they want to be around when that happened,
Right.
to help them through that. So I went to the owner and I said, look, I told him about the opportunity. He was very interested in politics. He had a jet that he used to fly around and pick up dignitaries to bring them in for Republican Party events and
cool.
whatnot.
Yeah.
So he was really interested. He
Right.
said, we need people like you in Montgomery. So yeah, I said, that means I'll be out some because it's a part-time position, but we're out 3 or 4 months off and on during the year. He said, go for it. So he gave me the permission, ran for it, and here we are.
The rest is history.
3 terms later,
yeah,
here we are.
That's right. That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you mentioned praying about it. I know that you're a man who's deeply rooted in your faith, and it's authentic. It's reflected in the relationships that you have and the convictions that you have. Kind of share a little bit about how your faith influences your role as a representative, as a legislator.
Well, my faith is very important to me, and obviously I try to follow the teachings of Jesus. We'll talk more about that, I think, as we go through the conversation today, but really try to do that. Of course, don't do that all the time, but try to. So everything about every decision I make, that's important to me because that's the forefront. I want to be salt and light. I want to honor God. I want to do the right thing. And some of these issues are not black and white. And because we're so polarized, people don't understand that. They're black and white to them, but so you're in the middle. So usually my prayer, and it's really something I just pray regularly, daily, is God go before me.
Yeah, wow.
Be there. So when I get there,
Right.
I don't know what's going to happen, and you don't, because there's things come out of left field, right field. You don't know what the issue is going to be and what people are going to say. But just go before me.
Right.
And when I'm there, give me the wisdom and insight. That's my prayer.
That's
so
good stuff.
sometimes I don't hold up my end of the bargain, but that's my prayer because you're walking into situations you don't know what you're going to get into, and but I know if God goes before me, and that's my focus anyway.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Give me some areas maybe where it's tough to balance your faith and your responsibility, your role as a legislator, because I imagine that there could be a situation where maybe your personal convictions don't exactly line up with public opinion. In a situation like that, how do you handle that? Or, have you had any other kind of challenges like where you're balancing faith and responsibility?
Yeah, so that's true. Sometimes my position as an evangelical Christian is not the viewpoint held by a lot of either other Christians, and I respect that, understand that, respect that, but it's different. So there's those challenges often.
Yeah.
I don't have, but I'll be honest with you, most of the conflict I have in that area comes from the people who 99% of the time like the way I vote, but it's these issues where they see it black and I see it as kind of gray.
Right.
And you get criticized or maybe miscast because you're doing something that is going to be unpleasing to them. So it's not
Right.
that I have a challenge in taking a position on an issue.
Right.
I'll give you an example going on right now in the legislature where I believe that people should have free exercise of their faith. And I think when the Supreme Court ruled years ago that you could not pray in schools, the Supreme Court decision that you can't have prayer over the microphone, you can't do prayer at football games, things like
Right.
that. I don't agree with that. I
Yeah.
think people should be free to exercise their faith. But there are people now who want to mandate that we do those things.
Right.
And that's where I've got a problem. Is okay. Look now. First of all, we have different faiths in our community, and I would expect a person of a different faith to exercise their faith. I think they should have that freedom to do so.
Right.
There are people who say, no, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And it's going to be the Christian viewpoint.
Yeah. That's a
Okay,
slippery slope.
That's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
You have and also I think too, of course, some Christians believe we have free will. Some believe you don't. I think we do have a choice in a lot of things.
Right.
So I don't think God really set it up so that we were just
Robots.
robots.
Right.
So I think that to me is a little bit inconsistent. Also, I think that when the Corinthians talks about if I speak but I don't, not with love,
Yeah. Right.
I'm like
but I have not love. I'm like
yeah,
the clanging
yeah,
cymbal.
I'm a clanging cymbal. It's
Yeah.
kind of rote. So if basically we mandate or legislate all of these things, I don't know how effective that is. I think it becomes almost rote and routine.
You're
and whatnot.
missing the intention of
Missing the
intention
intent.
of the heart.
And I think that we should certainly. So here's the. I believe we should have all those things. I don't think the government should mandate those
Right.
things.
Yeah.
I was disappointed when all these school systems have stopped praying at football games, and the reason that happens is because school systems have a limited amount of funds. The Freedom from Religion organizations send letters and say you're praying at the football
Threatening
games,
to
you got to
sue.
stop, and if you don't, we're going to sue. They don't have money to fight that, and all the lawyers basically tell them to stand down.
Right.
Well, I'm going to brag on one of our superintendents. The Walter Gonsolin is the Jefferson County school superintendent. He just was selected the last couple of weeks ago the National Superintendent of the Year.
Wow.
And the first one from Alabama ever.
Wow.
So we have in our district, Clay Chopwell High School, Pennsylvania High School, part of Jefferson County school system. Walter Gonsolin is a great person of faith. He's a great guy. Well, all these schools just kind of capitulating. Gardendale High School, I don't know if they still do it or not, but they were praying at football games, and that's a Jefferson County school. He had the letter from the Freedom from Religion. He ignored it. They did. Finally, the people called him and said, if you don't do this, we're going to sue, and we'll take this to the Supreme Court. And Dr. Gonsolin said, Supreme Court, United States? They said, yeah. He said, I like my chances. Well,
There you go.
so as far as I know, Gardner continued to do it. But the conflict I have is not that, I do want to represent my district. And there are times when I depart from my district, for example, gambling. We may talk about that a little bit, but gambling was an issue where I had some convictions on that. A lot of people in my district felt different, but that was one that to me was kind of black and white. But a lot of the issues that aren't, the really frankly the struggle I have is coming from my Christian brothers and sisters who criticize me for not wanting to be more use the legislature to do more of the things.
Like
I think
like a bully pulpit.
But I think that we're salt and light. I think you reach people through relationships, and I don't think not through legislation. We're not going to change the world through legislation.
Right.
And so that's so. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. And so, in regards to getting into like us being the salt and light, what do you think the role is of Christians in politics and government, or even just political engagement? Because I think that there's kind of a line. Like you hear some people who run away from anything that could be deemed political. Like even churches, there are some churches that will run away from topics that could be considered divisive, and run away from particular subjects that may be divisive, but they're topics that need to be addressed from a biblical perspective. So I don't think that's the way to go, because I think removing Christian influence from the world of politics and culture in general, I think yielding that influence would be a huge mistake. And then at the same time, having the perspective of what you were just talking about, of we can't legislate to change people's hearts. So what's the appropriate role, perspective for a Christian to have, and what kind of engagement should they have in politics?
And again, I'll probably get criticized for telling you what I really think about that.
Yeah.
But I think churches should preach Jesus. I think Christian churches should preach Jesus. And when we, the Bible says that if I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. So I think lifting up Jesus, that's the focus. So I think when churches, in the last several years, churches have increasingly gotten involved in political positions. And I think that actually undermines the whole faith. I think it undermines our whole outreach effort. I think if you preach Jesus, if you preach the Scripture, if you teach it, and you're basically teaching what Jesus, that's how we're going to make a difference. So I've written letters to large mega pastors, who I think got way too political, because I think what that did, it hurt people who are outside the faith, who might have a different political perspective, or might. We don't need to be political. That's what, in my mind, Jesus was not political. The people were looking for a political leader. They were looking for a king, and he wasn't that, and that kind of threw him for a curve. I mean, and if you go back and look at the religious leaders, that's what they were looking for. But he said, I'm not here to undo the law, or I'm here to fulfill it. But it was really more reaching the hearts and the minds, and that. And I think the way we reach the world is through proper instruction at church, but that's teaching the Bible, preaching Jesus. And then we take that out into the world. I don't think when the church takes a big position, I don't think that's near as effective, and I think it actually undermines, it makes it, we should not be viewed as a political instrument, in my opinion. But
I agree.
But we should be, our people who are out in the world ought to reflect Jesus.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things, you see the other side where people are afraid to teach on, subjects in the Bible that, that need to be taught on. Some of them, for example, surrounding, gender identity and, and the design for marriage between one man and one woman. And, so you see some churches, that will tiptoe around those things. Those issues need to be preached on, for sure.
I think you preach Jesus, you teach the Bible. The Scripture. I think everything's a game in the Scripture, right? That's right. But I get that point, and you're right, and that there are a lot of people that take that approach. I don't agree with that, but I just, again, I think.
But you don't want to be, you don't want to be an extension of a political party.
Yeah. I mean, I had people that were, I used to meet with some folks that were of a different. They were Christians, but they were of a different denomination than me. They were different politically than me. And I invited them one time to something at my church. And the first question they asked me was, "Well, is this going to be a political event?" I said, "No. Our church doesn't really do that. No, this is not." But their view was, their assumption was that if they walked in, they were going to feel. At a political rally or something. I said, no, that's not what this is all about. So I think that that's not. I didn't see when Jesus came and when he was here. That's not the road he took. And I think that's we need to get back to the road he took.
I think that's good. Yeah. And the one thing that unites all of us is that we're all sinners in need of a Savior, and when we profess faith in Christ and we receive the Holy Spirit, we're united by His Spirit, and that's what should unite us.
And there are issues that are important. I've had many pastors who come to me about different issues going on in our culture, and I agree with them, and I go and try to intervene and work with them, But I don't do it through a law necessarily. I will go sit down with people, or I can look as a budget chair. I can talk about let's talk about your, we help determine your funding. So let's figure out, what are you all about? What is your mission? If it's really something that's kind of really crazy. We can help, but so we need to be that influence. I'm not saying you skirt that, but how do you do that? I don't think it's by
do it in a tactful way.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So some people argue. You talked about the Freedom from Religion organization. Some people argue that faith should stay out of government. Faith should stay out of politics altogether. They cite separation of church and state. How would you respond to that? And then I know you talked about a little bit about it, but give us maybe an accurate understanding of what is the separation of church and state. You hear that a lot, but I'm not even sure that I completely understand what separation of
Yeah.
church and state is, and I think there's probably a lot of misunderstanding about what that means.
Well, I think, back in the day, there was the Church of England. There was one church and everybody, that was it, So when people came to the United States, they wanted religious freedom. They did not want a state church, and that's clear in our Constitution. We're not going to have a state religion. People are free to do whatever. So that we had that. But if you go to Washington, D.C., and you look at the Jefferson Memorial, who wrote the Constitution, now he was not an evangelical. They say he was a deist, and he had a lot of, there's a Jeffersonian Bible where he supposedly clipped
cut out all
the
elements to God.
And the miracles and things.
Yeah.
But he obviously he believed in God, and if you look at the Jefferson Monument, there's scripture around it. There he talks about God. I mean, so it's clear that if their intent was we're not going to have a state church, we're not going to nor are we going to prohibit people from expressing their beliefs or their faith.
Right.
Well, we've gotten to a world where people have said, no, separation of church and state means that the government cannot do anything, not even permit or allow anything religious to be in any public institution. That was, to me, not the way.
Right.
I don't think that was the original intent. I think we're way away from that, and I think you can see evidence of that all over. If you go to the Capitol in D.C., you're going to see all the evidence that references to God and Creator and things from these monuments and whatnot.
Right.
So I think that, but I think that people should be free to exercise their faith in a public setting, in a private setting. Now again, there are people who believe if you're going to have prayer at the football game, it's got to be from a Christian, maybe an evangelical Christian.
Right.
I think the way I would look at it, if you have a Muslim student that's going to pray, I would expect them. That would be uncomfortable for a lot of us. We had on the House floor. We always open our session with prayer. So in our Alabama legislature, we have prayer to open every session. My committee opens with prayer every day. The Speaker of the House recently added that when we came back in this session, above his dais up there, above his seat, it says he's added the words "In God We Trust." So we're back. The Alabama legislature believes in that.
You're right.
Well, we had an issue where one of our members from one of the Birmingham communities has got a large Indian population in his district, and they're very Republican. They're very conservative. He wanted to invite one of them to come pray. And there was some discussion about that, and concern and apprehension about that. And again, we pray every day, but now we got somebody what do we do with this group?
Right.
Well, just the speaker, I think, did a great great approach. That was going to be on the National Day of Prayer. That may have been one of the big issues, was why we're going to do this on National Day of Prayer. But anyway, so he invited people from different faiths. We have a Jewish member of the legislature. He had the rabbi prayed. We had a Reformed Baptist pray. We had a Church of God person pray. We had a Catholic pray. We had the Hindu. So all of that. I guess my point is, I think that we don't have the state religion. I think people should be free to exercise their faith in public settings, but I don't think you mandate that. Right. But a lot of people today who are against that will say even that permitting that free exercise is mixing church and state. I don't see it that way.
Right.
I don't think the founding fathers intended that either.
Right. You don't mandate it, and then you don't restrict it.
No,
it's a hands-off approach of let people exercise their faith the way they see fit. What biblical principles do you think should guide Christians in political engagement?
So I think, number one, the Micah 6:8, what does the Lord ask of thee? To act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your gods. I think that's in the forefront of my mind. Try to have it in the forefront of my mind. I think that's a lesson, to be just, to be humble, and that's not political. I mean, in the political world, we don't see justice and humility together sometimes, but I think that's scriptural, and I think that should be important. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. I mean, I think that's important. I think I was a business person. Everything I ever did was a negotiation. In the political world today, people want all or none, my way or the highway.
Right.
I don't think that's consistent with Scripture. We need to think about that. And then the other verse that the Micah 6:8. The one in Romans where it says, as much as is within your control, live peaceably with all men.
Mm-hmm.
In the political world, a lot of times people like to surprise people and like
Right.
create. We're going to throw a grenade and let things
Trying to
blow
get
up.
the
and
next viral reel.
Yeah,
and,
we're going to trick you.
soundbite.
We're going to trick you and back you in. And that doesn't yield good relationships.
Right.
So I try in my approach to do the other verses, but also try to be as best as I can. Let's talk about it. Let's either agree or disagree, but let's stay friends. And
Right.
I think you maintain that relationship. So to me, that is an approach I wish we saw more of. Today,
Right.
with the polarization, people like to kind of gang up and do surprises. You see this in D.C. where they'll just play a lot of those political games. And by the way, Montgomery is nothing like Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
A lot of people
I
think
figured
that the
that.
Alabama legislature is like we're not. We actually, 90% of what we pass is bipartisan. We do have better relationships. But I think those are the three verses that I think are the scripture passages that I think I try to rely upon in looking
Yeah.
at how you approach politics.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying that too, because I know you on a personal level, is like, you're no different in like a relationship with a friend than you are in a relationship with a politician, and, someone, a coworker, and that you're going to treat them with respect, you're going to treat them with love, you're going to try to understand their perspective. And then, but you're also going to stand strong in the convictions that you have.
Yeah, and I try to do that. But if you have that relationship, they'll respect that.
Right.
I mean, you can look at somebody and they won't try to get back at you. They won't try to get revenge. They'll understand, respect that.
Mm-hmm.
They respect and people respect authenticity and
Yeah.
integrity. And,
Right.
and even I do. Even if it's somebody that I disagree with politically, I respect those.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, for sure. I think that's part of the problem that you see in D.C. right now is that it's hard to trust that a lot of the people out there are being authentic.
Right.
When you see a lot of the grandstanding.
Right.
And a lot of what you were talking about, trying to catch somebody by surprise. There doesn't seem to be a lot of authenticity. It seems like a lot of it is geared towards their next political move or some kind of engagement on social media. And
I'm not a political scientist, but a lot of people hear today more and more about populism. We used to hear about that. There was a time in history where the populism, and I think that's where we are now, is that people really want to just kind of appeal to the masses. And with social media, it's so easy with these quick sound bites and little, I call them
Right.
kind of cheap sound
so
bites.
give me a definition of populism.
Well, populism, I think, is you're basically just, you're hearing what the crowd wants, and you're saying, I'm going to respond to that. And that happens a lot. Like, right, I know people who will go out and say something or tweet something or say something, and I'll say, what did you do? Well, I need to do that to make them happy. Well, that's, I think, is a mistake.
Right.
I think that's not authentic. That's not really integrity. You're just appealing to like the mob mentality, and sometimes the mob is not informed. I mean, sometimes they don't have all the facts, and
Right.
in this world we're in today with all the social media, it's tough for people to get all the information. So I think that populism is when you're just playing and pandering to which way the wind is blowing.
Right.
And that's the way I look at it. I mean, there's probably a better
Yeah.
definition of it.
No, I understand that. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it is hard to be informed about everything that, like, even the stuff that we vote on. Sometimes it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to be informed. So like one of my habits that I do is I actually text your son before I go and I vote, and I say, hey, tell me about these amendments and give me a little rundown of what each of them mean. And
Well, and I really actually appreciate it because there are people that text me before every election, and because you get there and you don't know who these judges are, you don't know who all these people are,
Right.
And they'll just say, hey, and I never tell anybody, here's how I want you to vote. What I'll tell you is here's what I'm going to do.
Right.
So here's what I'm going to do, and you can make your own judgment, And sometimes I come and say, well, pick between these one or two, And I'll say, well, this is what I'm going to do. But I mean, I don't want to, that's just.
You want them to. You want it to be their vote.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
they also.
I do before election time. I will get a lot of people texting me or calling me, and I respect. I appreciate the fact they trust my judgment, but also respect them for basically saying I want to make an informed decision.
Right.
So
It's good stuff.
John didn't tell me he's getting you, but
Oh yeah, I text him every time, pretty much. Yeah. All right. So we talked about populism. What is conservatism?
So again, I think that definition has changed. To me, a conservative is someone. I look at the Ronald Reagan principles. He had 11 principles of conservatism, but it's basically limited government, individual freedom, liberty, low taxes, personal responsibility, things like that. So just basically, the government is going to basically be a minimal part of your life, but we're going to allow you to
Small government.
small government. Liberalism, to me, is kind of the opposite. It was more like, well, look, there are a lot of people out there with needs. There are a lot of people. You hear the term bleeding heart liberal because on the conservative principle, you basically say we want to help empower individuals to be the best they can be and whatever. The liberal point of view is more like, well, there's people out there with needs, they have disadvantages, whatever. So the government's part of the government's role is to help them along more so, and not in the way the conservative would by just kind of empowering them through those type things. It would be more, this is where you get social programs and more, well, let's take care of this need, or let's fund this program, or let's do those things. And so it's just I think both have intention of helping people.
Right.
One wants to do it with less government. One thinks the government should play a larger role. That's the traditional views of liberalism today and conservatism. Today, though, liberals have been replaced a lot of times by leftists. And leftists the liberals and conservatives tend to do their things within the framework of the Constitution and American principles. Leftists don't. Leftists they want to change ideology. They want to create. They just want to kind of trash the Constitution and say no, this is the new value. This is the way. So that's the danger we have.
Right.
And on the right side, on the conservative side, you've got people that kind of go the opposite direction. Well, the government should be limited, but yet we're going to mandate these things. We're not going to allow. So it's kind of a country there. And more, a lot of conservatives are really more libertarian. Which they don't believe really in any government. Libertarians all over the board. They don't want any taxes.
Yeah.
They want open recreational use of marijuana. It's kind of whatever you want to do, you can do.
Right.
They want to drive on the roads, but who's going to pay for? They don't want to pay the tax. So it's a different. So I think that today, like in the Republican Party, you'll hear people say, "I'm a conservative," and he's a rhino. Well, really, a lot of the rhinos are really the conservatives, and the conservatives are really the one that's kind of moved to a different extreme there. We're all conservative in that we all believe in limited government, things like that. But so that's my view. I think it's what role should government be? And Reagan was very big that the 11 worst words you can hear is, "I'm from the government. I'm here to help."
Right. Yeah. That's so good.
So the liberal mentality would see that as a good thing. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. So that's that. But I think we're a little more extreme now. And I think the leftist ideology is very dangerous. I think we were going down a road where that was going to be challenging for us. And I think we're kind of have a temporary reprieve from that right now. But we need to get back to, we need to stay within the framework because we have a really great Constitution. It's amazing we're here this many years later. Benjamin Franklin said, "You have a democratic republic if you can keep it."
It's incredible.
And we understand what he means.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, so tell me, before we switch gears here, tell me why I'm from the government and I'm here to help, why that is not the best way forward.
Because the government is taking over and solving a problem you can solve better on your own. I was in my business, I was a business career, and I was usually in the ivory tower. I was the corporate headquarters. But if we had a problem on the plant floor, I could solve it in the room, but I didn't have all the information. The best way to solve a problem was going to the plant floor. So, guys, we got a problem. What's the way to fix it?
Gotcha.
And they would figure it out. When the government does it, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. They don't necessarily have your interest. Individuals are different, and so it's just more the government's going to take this issue over and then it becomes something they fund. It grows. Then they get to tell you how to do it. It becomes where that's like with school funding a lot right now. There are a lot of schools that have to have federal funding because they don't have local money. The poor system, they have to have federal money. A lot of more affluent schools don't have to have the federal money. They can get it, but they don't take it because there's strings attached to it.
Gotcha.
Well, if you take it, you're going to have to use it to do this, and they don't want to do that.
Right.
So I think it's just the idea of the government, if the more involved they are, the more direction they can tell about how you're going to live your life, what your policies are going to be, that type thing.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, let's kind of switch gears here and get into some issues. Okay. But before I go through some of these issues, are there any key issues right now that are going on that you think our listeners need to be aware of? Any
In
hot
Alabama?
topics? Yeah, in Alabama or the country. Either
Well,
one.
some of these are nerdy topics, like we're changing the school funding formula. That's a big thing, but probably not as much of an interest to a lot of people. We had a bill yesterday on the floor, and this is one of these black and white things that, it was about cell phones in classrooms. And we passed a law that says, this in the House did, now it moves to the Senate, but the law would be that you cannot have cell phones in a classroom during school hours. They have to be locked up, secured. Now, a lot of systems are already doing that. In Montgomery City, which has some really bad discipline problems and a lot of issues there, they had a superintendent that mandated that, and their discipline went way down. And we all agree that it's terrible for kids to have these cell phones in the classroom.
Right.
The rub for me was, okay, is that something we should tell every system? You should have a policy about that and let the system develop what they want, or is it something we should mandate? Now, it was interesting yesterday they had the vote, and some of the real more conservative people voted against it because, again, the government getting involved, and some saying, look, I've got a teenage daughter, I want her to have her cell phone in the case of an emergency, and maybe they should have them. They have to be turned off. Well, then the teachers are constantly making sure to turn your phone off. So
Right.
I get it. So we all agreed that it's better they're not there. But how do you do that? So it passed yesterday. 79 voted for it, 15 voted against it, and there were 9 of us who just abstained because the deal was, why do you abstain? Well, it was going to pass. I didn't want to send the message that I'm not for. If it were 50-50, I'd have to put a stake in the ground one way or the other. But on this one, my deal was I didn't want to. 9 of us abstained because we were conflicted, because we really feel like we agree with your goal, but we think it ought to be an individual. Each system should decide that policy.
Right.
We'll see where it goes. But the governor was for it.
So that passed. And now how will that be fleshed out? What will happen
now,
from here?
now that moves to the Senate.
Okay.
So the Senate has to pass it. If they pass it with no amendments and it goes to the governor, she'll sign it.
Okay.
If they pass it with amendments, it'll come back to the House and they'll have to
Gotcha.
sort out those amendments. But I think that everybody agrees that we need to minimize that.
Right.
A lot of people about cell phones, should we automatically, when they come, a lot of times they come where children have access to a lot of things, And I believe they should come with as restricted access, and if parents want to add more, you do it. Now,
Right.
of course, this goes back into the issue of how young should a child have a cell phone. Your generation is wrestling with things we never had to wrestle with.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something I at my age, I know what I think, but your age, you have to struggle with that.
Right.
I grew up, we're in an age now where people are tracking, their kids on cell phones. And we never did that,
Be home by dark.
Right?
Right?
That's right. That's right.
That's the way it was.
But I think that that's the issue out there. I mean, those are the issues that I can think of. We did some tax cuts. I mean, but in the legislature right now in Alabama, nothing really. The gambling was something that has been a hot topic the last several years. Yesterday, the Senate Pro Tem, who's the leader of the Senate, said it's too little, too late. We're not going to do gambling this session. So I think that put that to bed yesterday afternoon.
Yeah.
That was kind of a bubbling topic
Right.
out there.
Yeah. So, yeah, in regards to that, legalized sports betting, that's a big topic, people pushing for that to be legalized. When I listen to the radio, there's not 2 commercials that go by before there's another gambling commercial, and you see it everywhere now. I mean, you see it even on like College Game Day. You see the lines and the picks and all that stuff, and podcasts. You hear all about it. Kind of give me a rundown of where Alabama is right now on that, and then also, that's probably an issue that you've looked a lot into. How does it impact communities? And, for a believer who's listening to this podcast right now, what could be some things that you could offer to help kind of inform their thinking on it? So
gambling in Alabama is an interesting issue. Number one, it's illegal, except it's pretty much illegal to gamble. Despite what you see all over the state, it's illegal.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's illegal.
Now, if you ever are going to gamble, if we're ever going to have gambling, legalized gambling, a lottery or anything, any chance, anything like that has to be on the ballot and be voted on by the people. So all the legislature can do is vote to put something on the ballot.
Gotcha.
So so we can't pass it without. Other states they can do it, we can't. So that will have to be on the ballot, and that's the big rub. Should we put it on the ballot? And of course, the easy, cheap soundbite is just put it on the ballot and let the people decide. Well, we don't do that with everything, you know.
Right.
The other complication we have is we have the Porch Creek Indian tribe, which is federally protected. They have federal land, and we can't do anything about them. And the Porch Creeks already have several casinos in Alabama. They operate in their communities. And the communities, I'll just say this, the communities where they operate consider them good corporate citizens because they put a lot of their money back into the schools. They put a lot of money into the communities and the Main Street. So they don't have they're not like the Las Vegas casino, image,
Right.
Now, I will say, though, in those areas, the legislators will tell you that along with those casinos and all that good stuff they do, you do have drugs, you do have prostitution. Probably 25 to 30% of the people in their jails are casino related. So there's that element of it that's there. But in Alabama, they are on federal land. They're protected. We can't do anything about them. So they're making billions of dollars and not paying any taxes to the state. So what they would like to do is they want to say, enter into a compact with us and let us build one more casino, and then we'll pay the state taxes. But to do that, you've got to give us a monopoly. We don't want anybody else in the mix.
Gotcha.
So in Alabama, you've got the Porch Creeks, and then you've got these other gambling interests that are also through constitutional amendment. They've been mainly in the Black Belt and some of the other areas. It was the Montgomery, some of those areas there, and there used to be the one in Birmingham just recently changed hands, but the one here in Jefferson County was part of this group. They're different, and they're limited what they can do. They can't do. They can do simulcast and things like that, but they're limited what they can do. So they don't want the Porch Creeks to have their deal, because if the Porch Creeks get a monopoly, they're out of business.
Gotcha. Yeah.
The Porch Creeks don't want to do a deal unless those guys go away, because why should we do a deal? You can't touch us now anyway.
Yeah.
Then beyond that, you've got all this other stuff that's popping up. These like bingo, which is not legal.
Yeah.
Well, the but in Alabama, that's a misdemeanor. So if you shut down a bingo, you get somebody in a bingo, say them playing bingo, it's a misdemeanor. They pay $100. They're out. They're back doing it again.
They're back playing it.
So the attorney general says, I'm not going to mess with that unless you make it a felony. Then it becomes,
So now he's quit charging.
So now it's up to the sheriff. Well, the local sheriffs just aren't enforcing it, and some of them are probably actually in cahoots with us. So that's kind of the mix and the maze we're going through. I was really concerned because of the Jefferson County used to be the dog track off of John Rogers Road right here outside of Trussville. The Porch Creeks just bought that, and it clear to me that tells me that one day they think there's going to be a casino there, which we do not want.
Yeah.
I think they will do some improvements and do some things that'll probably be better for the site as it is now. But that's concern to me long term.
So let me stop you right here just for a second. So, because I think this is important, so part of what people probably argue is, and I don't agree with this, but what part of people argue is, well, if people are doing it anyway, like the sports gambling, like there's lots of people doing sports gambling, that if we allow it, then we can regulate it and we can benefit from it. I was going
to say that next, and I'll be honest with you, the legislators who are in the Republican Party that were leading this gambling effort last several years ago, I will tell you with a straight face that they tell me with a straight face that's what they were concerned about, because there's billions of dollars of unregulated gambling going on, and along with that, the drugs and all the other things, and nobody's enforcing it. So what they want to do is this comprehensive gaming, and let's regulate it, and that would control it. Now, I'm like you, though. I didn't really agree that. My idea was, well, let's just do the regulation part. Let's do the enforcement part.
It's like you got the laws on the books, like actually enforce it. It's a little bit like the border, right?
Yeah, let's do the enforcement part and not worry about that, But that was their intent. The sports betting is out of control. I mean, it's done. It's out of control. I mean, it is what, it's there. But we're not going to deal with it right now, because I think, well, let me back up. If the Porch Creeks and these other groups would get on the same page, then you could get a game, but you can never get them on the same page. And so a lot of people say, well, all I want is a lottery. I just want a standalone paper lottery. Because when I
Yeah.
go to Florida, I buy a lottery. I got church members that tell me all the time, when I go to Florida, I buy a lottery ticket. I want to be able to do that in Alabama. Okay, yeah. Well, the gambling interests don't want that to be the only issue, because if we do that, they know that their issues are never going to be addressed. So
Gotcha.
that's kind of a concession to them, that they don't want to do that. So that's why people say, why can't we just vote on a lottery? Well, it's not because there's not the votes to do that way. It's just that the gambling interest don't want that to happen, because that
Gotcha.
precludes their plans. So in Alabama, we came close last year to having a comprehensive gaming bill. I didn't vote for it, and I was against it. I was really concerned, particularly because I knew about they wanted Jefferson County Casino, and I was concerned it might be right here at our front door. Looks like that was the correct gut feeling there. That, though, down the road is going to be an issue that's going to be, we hear about a lot of people, as you move on through time, more and more people want the chance to vote. That's what they keep hearing over and over, chance to vote. So when I get criticized, it's not so much for,
your position
is
vote.
let me vote.
Yeah.
That's where I think, but I definitely don't want to see that. But I tell you that there's billions of dollars and a lot of stuff going on that's illegally that needs to be enforced.
Mm-hmm.
And so the easy answer is let's change the law and make the opening of bingo a felony, not a misdemeanor. I'm all for it. But
Right.
you hit all these traps
Yeah.
without,
Right. So in regards to the lottery, I know that we have some neighboring states that have a lottery. I think Georgia, Tennessee, Florida does. I don't know if Mississippi does.
We're the hole in the donut.
We're the hole in the donut.
We're the hole in
Mississippi.
the donut.
Okay, all right.
And so if you look at the state of Alabama around, we don't think about this because we live in the central part of the state, but a lot of these people that live all around those,
They'll drive.
They do that. So here's my position, and this I'll probably get criticized for this. A paper lottery, standalone
I'm not trying
lottery.
to get you criticized.
No. My family will criticize. My wife.
Yeah, I got you.
Because
I'm gonna get you in trouble.
I personally, if it were a standalone paper lottery, whatever, I don't. That's happening. I'm telling you, a lot of people do that now. And I know a lot of people who are against gambling that will do that. But that's not ever going to happen. But beyond that, we can't let it happen. I think we can't let it happen. So the question is, just honestly, would you vote? I had a lady call me the other day, and I told her this, and then her friend called me all upset because I had said this. But I said, if it were just a paper lottery, standalone, I wouldn't care so much about that because I don't see that. Now I do understand that it's gonna the people are gonna do that. I will never buy a lottery ticket. Never bought one. Never will because I understand the odds are so slim and it's just wasted money. It will prey upon poor people. We do a lot of things though in our society that do that. I tried to carry payday lending legislation several years ago for like 3 years to try to get payday lending outlawed. But we do that. We allow a lot of things.
Talk a little bit about that. Is that the people borrowing and the interest rates and unable to pay back the money? And
the interest rate. If you do the APR, the annual percentage rate, they're paying like 436% interest.
Wow.
Now, what it is, you'll borrow $50. You're going to pay back a $15 fee that you have to pay back in 30 days. So, and I've been to these stores. I've been to people. I've heard all the stories. But it's just not wise. It's a trap for poor people. Are people who are struggling,
Right.
And
people who are desperate for cash and go and get it, and then all of a sudden they're.
And I'd like to get rid of that, but then I hit the free market Republicans who basically say, well, that's their personal. If they want to borrow, so you get those are the issues. But that to me was one where you really prey. It's an industry designed to prey upon people in those situations. Now, I don't see the lottery as being that, but some people do, and I understand that argument. And it's I'm inconsistent in that I realize a disproportionate amount of people in that situation might buy lotteries their way out. I get it, but I'm just being honest with you. I could be political and tell you, but I'm not for gambling.
Right.
I don't want comprehensive gambling. I don't want all that goes with it. Standalone paper lottery. I'm not going to be out there advocating for it, but if the people want to vote on that, I would let people vote on that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Hey, question for you. What about the sports betting that's been going, like there's been a huge sports betting going on for a couple of years
Right.
in our city. Cause I used to do it. So I mean, like me and my buddies, we had bookies and all that. But like from my understanding, when they, and I can cut this out, I'm just
Yeah.
curious, when they got in trouble for it, because I remember it was a couple guys that got
Yep.
caught for it at the top, that were taking payment.
Right.
From my understanding of what someone told me, it was more of them not paying taxes on it versus the actual
Right.
bookkeeping that was going on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. See that's illegal, but it's done, but nobody's enforcing it. And so they got in trouble with now the feds. If you get in trouble with the taxing authorities of the feds, that's a different deal.
Right.
And I don't even know where that thing played out. I don't know. I don't know
I know it
what
still
became
goes
of
on
it.
because I saw friends that.
But I mean, I don't. With
Played
that
it.
particular issue, it was a big issue. I'm not sure where that
Yeah.
wound up. But
Yeah.
but yeah, no. It's right now we have gambling going on that's unregulated, and it's billions of dollars. And again, I believe we should be enforcing those laws. But
Yeah. So one of the topics I want to talk about was just because I've seen it in other states. Like my sister lives in Montana. I don't know what the exact law is in Montana, but a couple years ago we went to her hometown. There was no like marijuana stores, anything like that. We go there recently, and seems to be they're popping up all over the place. There's a big push nationwide, I guess, and in some states to legalize marijuana. And I saw a poll where the majority of Americans, believe that they approve of the use of recreational marijuana. I've personally witnessed the damage that it does to people's lives. I've never seen really anything good come from people who use marijuana. And Emily and I are. My wife and I, we're foster parents, and we see parents that fail drug tests all the time because they're not passing the test, and they may not only be using marijuana, and that's not the only reason why their family isn't together at that point. But you do see that it's really hard for people to break that habit once they get involved in that habit.
yeah.
At the same time, I guess the counter argument to that would be that there's a lot of people that struggle with alcohol, and alcohol rips up families.
Yeah.
It's easy to see personally why somebody shouldn't use marijuana. What's the legislative side of that, I guess?
Well, I think it's just a gateway drug, narcotic. I voted against the medical marijuana bill, not because I understand people who could use marijuana for tremors or certain injuries or certain situations they have. And if that were regulated like other drugs are,
Right.
that would be one thing, but it's not. And what happens is the medical marijuana bill we passed was just too wide open. It allowed for too much latitude in who could meet that medical condition.
Essentially, I could go and say I have a little hip
Yeah,
pain.
yeah. I mean, it was way too that, and then also it actually, and that we had a marijuana commission that was established that to this day is still having problems because it was dysfunctional. They couldn't get off the ground. It became what we thought it would be, very corrupt, very greed, all that kind of stuff. So that was not. If we want medical marijuana, then I think the feds need to do it like they do codeine or whatever else.
Right.
And then that becomes But that's not what we are. I agree with you. I think the marijuana is a terrible. It's the gateway drug, and that's where people start. And I just don't buy those other arguments. And I think that I voted against medical marijuana and got criticized for that. Got support, a lot of support.
Yeah.
But a lot of people criticized me and I understand. But this bill was too wide open, and you've got people now growing it in the state under this commission, and what do you think? I mean, I don't know. That's a problem. I think that's a. And I'm like, we see it when we go different places. You're seeing more and more of that, and I don't like that. I don't like the growth of the vaping stores. I mean, all that stuff to me is not. None of that's good.
It's not
good.
contributing to society in a healthy way.
It's not.
and this is another one I think that's really important, and I'm not sure what we can do on a state level here, but there's increasing access to to explicit content that's online, and there's kids have phones and they have access to the world, and the world essentially, really, parents don't like to think about this, but the world has access to them,
Right.
And it's a really dangerous thing, and I think our kids are being desensitized to a lot of things that should shock them.
I agree. Totally.
What can the government do anything about that?
Well, we've had this bill that's not passed, believe it or not, several times, where basically requiring that when a phone is sold, it's got a certain filter on it that limits that, And so if you have to proactively activate those things. Now, kids are smart, and they probably figure it out.
Yeah.
But we can't even get that passed because the manufacturers of these phones, the people that sell these phones, they don't want that responsibility. And they say, we can't do it. We can't keep up with one state versus another state versus another state. I don't buy that. I think if you're going to sell in Alabama, it should be hard for you to access that, as hard as it can be. That's what I think.
Yeah.
But we've not been able to get to that point yet, mainly because, again, the manufacturers make the argument, well, we can't, every state's different. How do we, you can always complicate, but to me, you got to go back to the root, use common sense. And then I think, too, it's on parents. Now, the problem is we have a society where a lot of parents are some are probably too involved, some are not involved at all. Mm-hmm. But in between there, it's a real challenge. And your generation, I really, Carol and I talked about this the other day, we really, feel for what you guys got to deal with, But it just distresses me when I see these young kids with phones.
Oh yeah, I know, me too.
It's just
yeah,
because things pop up on my phone. I'm a
Right.
boomer, so I don't know how to do anything. But so things pop up on my phone. It's like, what the heck? What is
right.
this?
Yeah,
And,
it's and you talked about one of the problems, one of the hard things I think that parents have is that their kids are more proficient in their technology than they are.
Yeah.
And so you can try to put filters on, you can try to put blocks on, whatever, but the kids know more about that than you. They know ways around that, things like that. And, I read a book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and I think I'm saying his last name right, but he talked about how parents in the world are almost overprotective of the physical world and way underprotective of their kids in the digital world.
That's great.
In the digital world, there's way more danger
there is. That's true.
than people anticipate. They think they're okay in their room with their phone, but really, I mean, you can, kids can access things that can, ruin generations of families.
You're right.
And,
You're right.
And so
I think that's important. I think we need to do all we can from government to address that, but it changes.
It is complicated,
and it is ever changing.
Right.
And then again, like you say, the kids are, part of what we're doing in schools is we're really increasing emphasis on how to teach them technology, so we're just making it harder for us to police it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure.
We're enabling them to do, but it's a tough, serious issue. It really is, and that's why I go back to, I think, if the church, if we preach Jesus, if we do the things we do, and we're salt and light in the world, and these are the way that we address some of these issues. It's tough to just.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, with the phones, it really to parents, like, parents being able to get off their phones and being present with their kids. So you think about all the really bad stuff, but then you don't sometimes think about just the daily habits that impact kids too. Like even just intentional conversations. Like I remember growing up, all the intentional conversations I had with my parents, and they were intentional with me, And so that's one of the things I try to do. Like when I'm at home, I try to put my phone up because I'm raising my kid, and if I'm not raising my kid and I'm not talking to him, my kids don't have devices, but if they did, those devices will be raising them, right? And then the other thing is, I think one of the pressures that parents understand this, like they understand the dangers of kids having phones, but the pressure that they feel is that every other kid has a phone, and they feel like they have to have a phone, or if not, their kid's going to be left out, not going to be included in some kind of activity. So there are a lot of challenges, but I think that's an area where we have to approach it, with a lot of wisdom, and it's good to hear like it's on the forefront of your mind and people in the legislature.
Carol and I, we're in grandparent world now. So sorry, we're in grandparent world. We've got 5 grandchildren, so we're that's our world right now. But we had 3 sons. We raised 3 boys. We were like your family. We were very intentional. We had a lot of conversations. We had dinner every night, all that kind of stuff. Carol and I would go out to sometimes dinner at a restaurant, and we'll look around. There'll be a family over there, and both parents will be on their phones, and the kids will be on some device.
iPads, yeah.
And what are we doing? It's
Right.
like, how sad that is. And then, because that time's going to go by so quickly. And like you say, what you're missing that opportunity to interact, which is relationship, but you're also, what are your children? What are they looking at? What are they learning
Right.
in that deal? And so I think that's important that people detach.
Yeah.
I heard recently that a lot of the younger people are going back to the flip phones.
Yeah.
Because they can disengage. Because I think people have realized that this constant information.
Yeah. For sure.
It's not healthy. It's not. And you see mental health being such an issue, and in the legislature, I mean that is such an issue in the legislature, in the schools, in the workplace. Mental health is a growing area that we're having to fund, and a lot of this I think it's traced back to what we're talking about.
Oh, it definitely does. I mean, if you go back and look at in that book that he wrote, Jonathan Haidt wrote, if you go back and look when social media, the iPhone first was created, and social media apps, and then this is crazy, but the front-facing camera.
Oh,
that
yeah.
At that point, you just started to see anxiety, depression, a slew of other mental health problems just explode, be on the rise. And it's tough sledding, I think, right now for kids who are locked in on their phones, and I think we can do a better job as adults of.
Well, the other thing
wise.
that again, your time with your kids goes by very quicker than you realize. But at your age with your children, you don't have the benefit of the experience that Carol and I had with our children.
Yeah.
And so parents a lot of times will think, if my kid doesn't get invited to this party or doesn't go to this event or doesn't do this thing, it's going to be devastating in their life. Well, what you don't know is down the road, when you look back, you don't even remember that. You'll bring this up to your kids. They go, I don't remember that.
Right.
I mean, so I think that we always. I carried the school choice bill last year, which opened the opportunity for parents to direct their money toward their kids' education, not necessarily the public school, whatnot. And of course, I'm a big public school advocate, but I did that because I really feel like today people want customization, flexibility, and choice. And there are more and more people that we're getting the need to conform in a bad way in the public setting. To me, no, let's open it up. Let's let people have it, and let people realize it's okay to be different. It's okay to have a different.
Yeah.
You don't have to do. So it's a. I wish, Carol and I have said this a lot of times, I wish that people your age knew what we knew, that really doesn't matter like you think.
Well,
it does.
I think that's where discipleship comes in. We need
so.
older people discipling us, and I see you're holding a book right there.
I do.
Give us that. We're about to wrap up here,
Okay.
but what's the best? I know I asked you what the best book you've read recently is.
I'm not a
Since you're
voracious reader. Most people in my family are, and I'm not. I like to read biographies. I like to read, current type things, whatnot, historical things. But you asked me what the best book I read recently was, and this is one that my son Jake gave me for Father's Day, and it's by John Maxwell and Chris Hodges at Church of the Highlands. It's Jesus, the High Road Leader, and it's following the path he wants us to travel. And I guess I don't know that I don't do all these things all the time, but when I read this book, to me, it just talked about Jesus as a leader and what kind of leader he was. And everything in this book is what I intuitively believe and what I've tried to do. And like this mentions here that Jesus valued all people. He gave more than he took. These are the chapters. Mm-hmm. Jesus didn't keep score. Jesus acknowledged his humanness. Because one way to relate to people is expose your vulnerabilities. Let them know you're not, you're not always in charge. Jesus did the right things for the right reasons. Carol's always challenged. When I married Carol, she was a lot of times, "What's your motive?" Well, what's your motive? And
Yeah.
he always did the right things for the right reasons. He embraced authenticity, and I think today, especially in today's world, that is so important. Jesus placed people above his agenda, and Jesus brought people together. So I thought this book, and I'll just read it. It talks you can take the low road as a leader, the middle road as a leader, or the high road. Low road people take more than they give, and as a result of making the world better and brighter, they make the world darker. So I see in political work some people who just take more than they give.
Yeah.
Okay. The middle road focus on fairness and often keep score. So they may not be aware of it, but they maintain the status quo and nothing gets better or brighter. So just basically, okay, well, but the high road, people on this road follow Jesus' example. They give more than they take. They serve others out of love. They turn the other cheek instead of taking offense. Their lives reflect the behavior of Jesus, and because they do these things, they make the world a better place. So you don't have to retaliate. You don't, this book to me just was a very affirming, but it also was timely for me as I went back in the legislative session.
Yeah, wise words. Danny, I appreciate you joining us, man, and I thank you for your service, and you represent yourself well, and I appreciate your commitment to your faith and also the way you serve your role.
We're right back at you, and I appreciate what you do, and I know the road you've taken, and you're a great guy, and I'm happy you're in my life.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you, man. Hey, and that's it for Kingdom Reflections today. Check us out on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and we'll be back next week.